from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. What is the world waiting for? Palestinians condemn the latest US veto on a ceasefire in Gaza as Israel continues its attacks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows Israel will not pay any price for the release of hostages held in Gaza as families rally for their safe return. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange makes his final attempt to avoid extradition from the UK to the US to face spying charges. And tractors blockade Madrid as Spanish farmers become the latest in the EU to protest against its policies. Dozens of Palestinians have been killed across southern Gaza as Israel's military continues to attack sites it claims are being used by Hamas militants. Missiles hit residential buildings in Rafah and Khan Yunis overnight. Authorities in Gaza say that more than 29,000 people have been killed since the latest escalation began in October. Israel says Hamas must be destroyed before any hostage deal or ceasefire can occur. A UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza was vetoed by the United States, a move that China has criticised.
The United States has once again single-handedly vetoed it, pushing the situation in Gaza into an even more dangerous situation, in which all parties concerned, including China, have expressed their strong disappointment and dissatisfaction.
Let's go to Gaza now and talk to our correspondent Noor Harazin, who is in Rafah. Noor, there have been some fresh attacks in southern Gaza. Tell us how Palestinians are reacting to this third US veto on UN action.
Well, actually, Palestinians here on the ground, the Gazans here in the coastal enclave, they have actually lost hope. They lost faith in the international community. They lost hope in the organizations in the UN. It reached a point where we are talking actually big numbers. I mean, since the 7th of October, Israel killed 29,319 Palestinians. 70 of them are women and children. The humanitarian situation here in the coastal enclave is unbearable. There is actually a number of Palestinians, including children, that died out of hunger. So the situation is catastrophic, and for Palestinians that the whole world is watching, but yet nothing is changing on the ground. Actually, things are getting harder on Palestinians here in Gaza. They've actually lost all hope in the international community, especially when we are talking about the U.S. I mean, Palestinians do take the U.S. as the biggest and the first supporter of Israel. So to them, this veto was expected. And let us talk about the latest on the ground here in southern Gaza. And in one of the highlights, the Israeli forces and the Israeli tanks actually incursioned in Al-Mawasi refugee camp. And the Al-Mawasi refugee camp, it is supposed to be the safest area here in Gaza, in Rafah, as the IDF, the Israeli army, repeatedly mentioned the Al-Mawasi refugee camp for the displaced Palestinians here in Gaza to evacuate to and take shelter inside the Al-Mawasi refugee camp, marking it as a green zone. However, overnight, the Israeli forces carried a land invasion in Al-Mawasi refugee camp. A number of Palestinians were killed and dozens were injured.
Noor, let's talk about what's happening in the West Bank, where dozens of Palestinians have been arrested in Israeli raids. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yes, overnight there was actually a number of Israeli raids in different cities and towns in the West Bank, Qalqilia, Nablus, Tul Karim, Jenin, and these Israeli raids on Palestinian camps in the West Bank, it is not something new. Actually, it has been happening since the 7th of October, a number of Palestinians were arrested in Nablus and also in Qalqilia. According to the Palestinian medical sources, there's also a number of Palestinian young men that were killed in Qalqilia. However, the ambulances are still not able to reach them or reach their bodies. The Palestinian Prisoners Committee in the West Bank said that the number of Palestinians that actually the Israeli forces arrested them since the 7th of October is now more than 7,000. And actually the Israeli forces carry these raids on the towns of the West Bank on a weekly basis.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harrison in Rafah. Well, that's the view in Gaza. Let's head to Israel now and talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates. So, Sarah, how has Israel responded to the latest Security Council meeting on its military operation in Gaza?
With defiance, Robin, Israeli media is reporting, quoting a senior official as saying that there will be no decision on sending a delegation back to Cairo for these ceasefire, these hostage talks, until it's proven that Hamas's position has softened. Now, we saw the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, pull out of these talks in Cairo a week or so ago, citing Hamas's demands as delusional. This was, of course, for a prisoner swap and an end to this war. Well, Netanyahu, he is vowing to push ahead with this military operation amid widespread fear of a potential push into that southern city of Rafah. Here's more of what we heard from Netanyahu.
There is considerable pressure on Israel at home and abroad to stop the war before we achieve all of its goals, including a deal at any price to free the hostages. We very much want to achieve another release, and we are prepared to go far, but we are not prepared to pay any price, certainly not the delusional prices that Hamas is demanding of us, the meaning of which is the defeat of the State of Israel.
Robin, fresh explosions are being reported in the Syrian capital of Damascus just hours after an alleged Israeli airstrike on an area there which reportedly killed 2 people, wounded a few others. Still no claim as to who was behind that strike.
And Sarah, back in Israel, there have been more big protests calling for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas.
Certainly, this is after extremely inflammatory comments by the far-right Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. He came out yesterday to say the return of hostages is not the most important thing, that the most important thing is finishing the war and destroying Hamas. This has caused a real lot of anger to spill over in the political echelon. We've heard from the War Cabinet Minister, Benny Gantz. He said this is the primary objective. Just also a little while ago from the President, Isaac Herzog, he said a very disrespectful discourse is beginning to develop around these hostages and their families, while the opposition leader Yair Lapid is slamming him as a moral disgrace. And of course, not just anger within the political arena, also onto the streets, as you mentioned, after these comments there by Smotrich. Family members, people who love the hostages inside Gaza, people who've got their families inside, they demonstrated outside the Defence Ministry here in Tel Aviv. They're calling on the wider public to come and join them to, quote, set the streets on fire. And this, of course, comes as the US Mideast envoy, Brett McGurk, he is right now in Cairo for talks to try and bring an end to this war and get these hostages home. He will be here in Israel tomorrow for talks with senior officials, including the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. A British nuclear missile test has failed for a second time in a row. The Trident weapon crashed into the ocean near the submarine it was launched from. A previous test in 2016 also failed. The UK's last successful launch of a Trident missile took place in 2012. The Defence Ministry's labelled the recent event an anomaly and said it occurred during an exercise last month off the coast of Florida. It wouldn't comment further due to national security. Police in India have fired tear gas at thousands of farmers as they tried to resume a protest march on the capital, Delhi. It came after the farmers, who are calling for guaranteed crop prices backed by law, rejected the government's latest offer. The Agriculture Minister said authorities are ready for another round of talks and urged farmers to return to negotiations. After more than a week of negotiations, two major political parties in Pakistan have reached a power-sharing agreement to form the next government. It's set to return Shehbaz Sharif to the role of Prime Minister, while candidates loyal to jailed former leader Imran Khan have been sidelined. Khan's party won the most seats in this month's election, but were forced to stand as independents after a crackdown. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A last-ditch legal bid. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange makes his final attempt to avoid extradition from the UK to the United States.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Widespread criticism against the latest US veto on an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as Israel continues its attacks across the Palestinian enclave. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows that Israel will not pay any price for the release of hostages held in Gaza as families rally for their safe return. Russia's parliament is due to vote on whether to suspend its participation in a key international security forum. President Putin's United Russia Party says involvement in the OSCE is no longer in the country's interest. Moscow has used its vote in the organisation to prevent policy agreements on fellow member Ukraine. Russia's foreign minister walked out of an OSCE meeting in November after Moscow was strongly criticised for its military action in Ukraine. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is again trying to prevent his extradition from the UK to the United States, where he's wanted on spying charges. It's the second and final day of his hearing at London's High Court, where his lawyers claim that he's being punished for exposing criminal acts by the US government. Assange is said to be too unwell to appear in person. Well, our correspondent Yolo Abdavid is at London's High Court. So, Yolo, we can see some protests happening behind you. What's been happening so far and what will happen next if this appeal is rejected?
Well, it's the US defense through their barristers who've been outlining why Julian Assange should be extradited to stand a trial in the US and why he needs to answer charges against him. And in many, many ways, listening to some and seeing some of the evidence that was presented and some of the arguments presented by the US side this morning seems to suggest suggest that they are arguing that Julian Assange is not a journalist, that he should be tried under the Espionage Act in the United States, and that's precisely, of course, one of the reasons why the defence is saying that he should not be extradited. It'll be for Dame Victoria Sharp and Mr. Justice Johnson to decide, possibly today, possibly in the coming few weeks, whether the legal requirement under the UK-US extradition treaty from 2003, whether he can be extradited. And of course the arguments presented against that were made yesterday by the defence barristers on behalf of Julian Assange. Now his family, his friends, the hundreds of supporters here who are quieter than they have been, are in no doubt that he should not be extradited. He's done nothing to damage the US apart from releasing and publishing embarrassing documents. And that's why they fear for whether he'd have a fair trial in the States, and his wife, Stella Assange, fears that he won't survive whether he'd be extradited to the US or not. His health is poor, and again, he's not in court. So there's real concern there, and that's why on this second day, we should know fairly soon whether there will be another full-blown hearing to present the arguments why he shouldn't be extradited. But that is in the gift of Dame Victoria Sharp and Mr. Justice Johnson.
So those are some of the arguments why he shouldn't be sent to the United States. But why does the United States think that he should be?
Well, they would argue, and they have in a written statement as well as orally today, they've presented actually Julian Assange consistently and repeatedly misrepresented some of the documentation which was, they say, he obtained illegally and published unverified and put it out there for everybody to see. Now, lots of people here would argue, well, that was in the public interest, that we do know about these alleged war crimes, alleged torture, and it's not just the United States government that suffered from that, or the US military, but of course many other organizations, countries, leaders, and individuals as well. So the argument now is whether he had a right to do what he did. Did he have a right to obtain the material which the US authorities would argue actually put the lives of their servicemen and women in danger? And that's why they want to put him on several charges, but the biggest one is of spying, of espionage, and that's why they are keen to have him extradited. Now, we know from the barristers of Julian Assange there are many, many counter-arguments that he wouldn't have a fair trial, he'd be unsafe, and actually his health wouldn't allow him to be tried. And that's why, if there is an announcement today, Robin, I think quite quickly, according to Jennifer Robinson, his lawyer, they would repeal and ask for the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg to hear another case to try and keep him here, because that's what they're worried about. As soon as he's in the United States, they are worried there'll be extra charges. They even might incur the death penalty if he's found guilty. And that's what they're trying to battle right until the end of this court case later today.
Yolo, thank you very much. The correspondent Yolo Abdavid at London's High Court. Farmers in Spain are staging a major protest in Madrid, calling for better prices for their products and changes in European agricultural policies. Some scuffled with police as hundreds of tractors blockaded the city centre, disrupting traffic. Farmers have been protesting for weeks across European countries, including Germany, Poland, Greece and Italy. Well, our correspondent Ken Brown is in Madrid. So, Ken, what's been happening so far today?
Yes, Robin, thousands of farmers on the streets of Madrid today, answering union calls to create a historic protest in the country's capital. 800 to 900 tractors have blocked up the centre of the city here. They're trying to make their way down to the Agriculture Ministry, not far from here. They've been angered by the police stopping them on the periphery of Madrid. Finally, most of them have made it this far. They've come from as far afield as the Basque Country in the north, Andalusia in the south, Aragon. We've heard heard Catalan being spoken. Also, farmers here tell us that their livelihoods are at risk. They say that soaring costs and plummeting prices for their produce is putting them in a desperate situation. The average salary for agricultural workers here in Spain is at around $1,500 per month, which isn't very far off the minimum wage. They say that they want their work, they want their produce to be better valued by society, by government and by Brussels. They say also lay blame on produce coming from outside the European Union. Here's more in our report. Protest convoys and roadblocks disrupting traffic and food deliveries, mirroring those around Europe and other parts of the world. Farmers are calling for fair prices for their produce in the face of rising costs and argue there is too much bureaucracy and too many environmental regulations. They say foreign imports, particularly from Morocco, have an unfair advantage that they don't have to play by EU rules.
They don't demand the same standards in products coming from Morocco. That's unfair trade.
We want the EU to ensure a level playing field. We personally don't want them to allow us to use harmful fertilizers.
Tractors on the streets of Madrid are making their presence felt, while over the past couple of weeks we've seen trucks with Moroccan tomatoes attacked in the south of the country, in Granada, in the north. Ports of Tarragona and highways connecting Spain and France have also been blocked.
Next Monday, the minister will be in Brussels working on behalf of the main demands the farmers are seeking, like the simplification of the common agricultural policy, which is crucial.
Wednesday's protests in Madrid come as Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is in Rabat, where he's meeting King Mohammed VI. Meanwhile, the farmers continue to make their voices heard with thousands of others around Europe and the world. 4% of Spain's labour force works in the agriculture sector. That's some 800,000 people. They feel threatened. Spain is known as Europe's vegetable garden, one of the bloc's leading producers of fruits and vegetables. Now, they also face another huge challenge in climate change. We've had drought conditions for 3 years now in the north, in Catalonia, in the south, in Andalusia. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Generalitat, or the local government in Catalonia, order the agriculture sector to use half of the water that it has been using up to now. So huge challenges facing Spanish farmers, and they are making their concerns known loud and clear here in Madrid, Robin.
And these protests aren't a one-off, are they? There've been weeks of protests from Spanish farmers as well as farmers in other countries. How's the Spanish government responded to these weeks of protests?
Yes, weeks of protests around Spain, blockades. We've seen certain moments of real tension and even violence between the police and the protesters. We saw Agriculture Minister Luis Planas talk about how he is trying to address the concerns of the farmers. There's a big meeting coming up next Monday in Brussels, and farmers really wanting to see some positive developments from there. They want to see some concrete commitments by the government, particularly in aid specifically for the agricultural sector.
Ken, thank you very much. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Madrid. Up to 40,000 construction sites in Italy could be left in limbo after the government scaled back a popular set of tax breaks. The scheme has been credited with helping the Italian economy recover from the coronavirus pandemic. But the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, says it's too expensive. Our correspondent Giles Gibson reports.
Scaffolding went up on houses and apartment blocks all over Italy in recent years as people rushed to take advantage of a great deal. If you made your home more energy efficient, the Super Bonus scheme not only covered the cost of construction, an additional 10% was paid out. But with the tax breaks being cut to 70% for 2024 and 50% next year, trade unions and construction firms say thousands of sites will be left in limbo.
It's about 40,000 work sites affecting more than 350,000 families. These sites are all at risk of staying unfinished, also generating a lot of litigation between citizens and businesses. So in the end, if we had to estimate how much this will cost the state, there's a risk of it costing even more, because there will be lots of litigation in the Italian courts.
Those who filed paperwork by the end of 2023 are still eligible for the original tax breaks, but many construction companies can't afford to finish projects under the new lower levels. Italy's finance minister Giancarlo Giorgetti says the country couldn't afford the old policy anymore, with it costing the state up to $5 billion per month. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni inherited the Superbonus scheme from previous governments and has also been openly critical of it. Many in the construction industry believe the scheme was simply badly designed from the start.
The real change, a real innovation, which is also kind of, I think, what brought its demise in the long run, was the ability, which was never possible before, to sell these credits on, to basically use them for payment, because with the old bonus schemes, you'd have to pay out of pocket, and then you would be able to basically detract those expenditures from your tax bills.
Critics say it's that ability to buy and sell tax credits that's partly to blame for widespread fraud since the Superbonus was first introduced. As companies here in Italy adjust to lower government subsidies, the sector is facing significant challenges across the Eurozone as a whole. Construction firms are having an easier time finding workers and materials, but they also say that demand is falling. The industry is hoping the European Central Bank will start cutting interest rates in the spring, making it cheaper for both companies and families to borrow. Back in Italy, many buildings that should now be more energy efficient could be left worse off than before, their owners potentially tied up in years of litigation. Giles Gibson for CGTN, Rome.
And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Europe's weather forecast. Let's see what will happen on Thursday and Friday. Well, starting with what weather forecast by Thursday, there could be light or moderate rainfall building up across France, the UK, Germany, Poland, all the way to much of Belarus and portions of Ukraine. Scandinavia into western Russia could expect a light to moderate snow. Then as we get into Friday, you will see very similar picture across the north all the way to the east. Still widespread precipitation across Central into Western Europe. At the same time, if you're living across Iberian Peninsula, much of Italian Peninsula and the west coast of the Balkans, there could be light rain as well. You better keep your umbrellas handy. Temperature-wise, the cold air will first impact the Iberian Peninsula into Western Europe by Thursday. Then it will continue to push eastward, affecting places like France, Germany, and Poland. So, under influence of cold air and precipitation, the daily highs be just in the single digits across the north for next 2 days, around 10 degrees Celsius for daily highs across much of Central Europe. And now here, let's see the city forecast by Friday. Daily highs be around 10 for Brussels, 11 for the highs in Berlin and Vienna. Also light rain could be expected. Well, that's it for now. Stay tuned for more city forecast.